So hello again, everybody. Here we are with another module. Once again, repeating, reading in first language is very similar to reading in the second language. There are lots of interesting correlations. From your book, 3 categories to consider when assessing reading for English language learners. There is a YouTube for you to look at. Syntax, semantics. I did not include pronunciation. I looked at graphophonics instead of pronunciation, syntax, and semantics. You're welcome to look at these just briefly. There are always semantic problems because, as we've discussed throughout this course, what you see is not always what you get. It depends on context cues and all kinds of other things. So we have to increase comprehension by helping readers activate their background knowledge. And it's okay to read something over and over again and read several times. When I read academic texts, I read them closely, and then I read them generally, and then I go back and highlight and make notes with them. And it's very possible, as you all know, that we can read without knowing every single word. It's better to try to teach English language learners to predict by looking at key words and context cues instead of trying to translate word for word. Here's a little activity that will give you some idea of what it's like to read without knowing every single word in a kind of a strange way. This is a miscue. Okay, can you read that? It's all misspelled, but your brain is automatically putting it into English for you. Why are texts difficult for English language learners? Because they're limited by their proficiency, they're limited by the new cultural context, and there might be a different script, and also semantics may be different, and semantics will be different. Really interesting. See, there are 3 languages there, and there's a YouTube with trilingual examples that you might want to look at. When I did my dissertation work in northern China, the street signs were written in Chinese, Mongolian, and sometimes English, all together, just like this stop sign. This is an example of advertising that's code switching. 23 flavors blended into one extraordinary. Unbelievable. That's from Mexico. So those of you who speak another language, I'm sure you have fun doing something like this. I do this all the time with my friends. I actually just came back from Canada, and my French is not 100% perfect. So I would start in French, and then if I couldn't find the word, I'd insert the English word, and my French-Canadian friends would smile, and then I'd go back to French. Limited proficiency, a problem that English language learners, we all sort of just hit the wall and don't know what to do. Your students may only need one contextual cue to be able to get the word that they need. Can you guess what this word means by looking at that script? Can you read this? Not unless you've got the cues and the background knowledge. If the context is limited, how would you translate this word? Now, if you see a visual and there's more contextual cues, can you translate this word? Syntax. Syntax is the way, the construction of the way that we look at words. There's a YouTube video you may want to look at that I'll put in bright space for you about syntax if you're interested in the nuts and bolts of this. Language is never separated from culture. We always have culture whenever we speak, and we always show and reflect our identity, our culture, and our status when we speak. Here's something interesting in terms of cultural differences using the same language in English. What does Big Bang Theory mean to you, or to a Korean, or to a Russian student? Think of an example that might sound odd or incomprehensible to an English learner. This is a K-pop, and this is the Big Bang Theory that is, the K-pop sings songs about Big Bang, and a Russian student, the Big Bang is all about communism versus democracy and the end of the world through nuclear devastation. So here is what proficient readers do, one of my favorite Renoir paintings. We should teach our English language learners, in fact all our students, metacognitive strategies to learn to reflect on their own thinking, to learn to reflect on their reading, to learn to reflect on the knowledge that they're being exposed to. One of the strategies that we can teach students to help them learn to read better is to teach them structures or genres of text to help them predict and understand what's going on in that text. This is the genre or the structure of a poem, an Old English poem. So here we have some Chinese. In terms of word order, if you look at that, it's surprisingly like English, although the other systems, the sound, the grammar, are very different. So you're going to get students who might have the same word order coming through, but they have different phonetic systems and different semantic systems, syntactical systems. Chinese, just like English, has homophones where the particle, these three particles have the same pronunciation, but they have different characters and scripts and different meaning. Some languages, like Finnish, is a case system, an agglutinative language where everything is based on suffixes, and there are something like 17 different suffixes just for prepositional cases in Finnish. Here's a little bit more about Finnish to show the complexity of languages that are built agglutinatively, particles on particles. English is not like this anymore. It does have a few remnants of this, but not much left in modern day English. Arabic. Taking a look at Arabic, you can see that these little dots on the top, those are the vowels. A different sense of how to construct a phonetic and script-based language. I urge you to watch this video. It'll be useful and fun. So, because of technology, this is a good question to ask. What is the difference between reading online and reading on print? I guess one of the big differences that I've seen is it's harder to focus with hyperlinks and clicking, and the light is even different. Your attention is harder to maintain when you're reading online for certain parts of the internet, at least. Here's a nice resource for you in terms of reading that you might want to look at. We talked earlier about participation structures, the structure of how people communicate with each other. What kind of participation structures actually promote reading? I would say one thing that I could say about that would be the whole class, reading together, reading in small groups, reading in pairs, reading individually. All of them work. because the entire goal is to create a community of readers, of engaged people who like the idea of reading. And I'm not just saying especially reading text, print books, but also reading online, but using reading to gather information, to analyze information, and to process information, and to use it. The guided reading strategy, I'm sure a lot of you already know about that, makes use of the zone of proximal development, Vygotsky's ZPD, with small groups. Students support each other, they scaffold each other's reading, and the teacher scaffolds. You can offer a literary discussion of the elements, of the character, of the plot, of the setting. Before reading, what would you do? You introduce the text, have students predict, front load some important vocabulary. During the reading, the students can read silently or aloud, and the teacher monitors and scaffolds. And then afterwards you share and do comprehension checks and maybe do some sort of exercise that's more authentic language producing. And then if you need to, a mini lesson can be retaught. As students read, the teacher can observe, give immediate help, and can ask students to help each other as well. The idea is to create a low anxiety, positive, supportive environment, and to show students that the reading process isn't something you just do once and it's over, or you do very fast. It's a kind of explicit way to sort of teach concentration and focus. Literary circles, one of my favorite things, literary response groups. So how can you extend the response after somebody reads something and answers a few questions? You can extend it by asking students to make illustrations or pictures, by telling their own story, by retelling the story as a podcast, by writing in their journals, by making something creative like a collage or a mobile or a poster. You could have a game that's related to the reading, and you can do things like readers' theater. Here's some advice for teachers who are interested in reading. The language experience approach, very interesting approach. It's quite successful. If you have any interest in this, please take a look at that YouTube. Stories are dictated by the individual or the class to learn the language. There are other things you can check out as well. Pattern books, big books. You can look at directed listening and thinking activities, DLTA, story mapping, readers' theater. Here's an activity that you can give to your students. You can dictate a story to your partner and then let them add or modify or transform the story to make it their own. And then you can sit down and discuss the story in pairs with your partner. Here's another activity. You can think of a famous story and map the plot. There's a link. You can go to www.howtowriteabooknow.com/basic-plots. That's an interesting activity. For intermediate reader strategies, here's some ideas. And how do we assess reading for English language learners? Well, I would say we should assess daily. You can do a miscue analysis, like a running record. You can do reading inventories. You can ask students to read to you and keep a list of the errors that are significant. Have students keep portfolios to mark their own progress. There's a chart in your book on page 388 and a chart on page 390. Here is part of those charts for you to look at. Okay. Here's the other chart to look at. for assessment in reading. And this is our last slide. I just want you to think about a little bit, how did you learn to read? Did you enjoy that process? Are you a reader? Do you consider yourself a reader? How much do you read every week? Is there anything you read every day? And why do you read that every day? Would you consider yourself more of an online reader than a printed text reader? Do you read magazines? Do you read books? Do you only read blogs? Do you watch more video now than you read? These are all questions that you can find out from your students as well, but it's interesting from your own perspective. My personal perspective is I've never owned a television. I prefer to read. Maybe daughter of immigrants, so I don't know, in my age too. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little module, and look forward to seeing you next time.